Hello and welcome to the Auditing Antics podcast. So, Michelle, we made it to 2026, and I have to say, we're going to be starting this year out pretty strong. We
Mhm.
have a lot of things going on in the industry right now related to obviously skin substitutes, which we're going to talk about today. But then we also have, the typical things we deal with each year, finding out what's finalized in the final rule, and the vascular specialty is hit pretty hard this year, so we have a lot that we need to tackle.
Mhm.
But today I feel that it's extremely important that we pause and talk again about skin substitutes. Now, I'm going to throw some disclaimers out there to begin with, and a couple of things here. Number one, if you are working in this industry, you're listening to this podcast, but you don't do wound care, you're not really familiar with skin substitutes, I want you to hang in with us for this one, because I think that what is going on in this situation, which we will shed a lot of light on that today, what's going on in this situation ultimately is something that can put our physicians at pretty high risk from a compliance perspective if they are not carefully making their decisions from the perspective of clinically, what they're choosing to purchase for their practice,
Mm.
listening outside of just distributors, which we will dive into heavily today.
Mm.
It's something where we have said this before in past episodes, that when you have a new product, when you have something you're using that is extremely high dollar, there's going to be a very large magnifying glass on you.
Mhm.
We're seeing that right now. And Michelle, I know that you don't have necessarily a lot of experience in this space like I do,
Now,
but I know that you know enough in this industry to know what red flags should be, and that's what we really need to focus on today is the red flags.
mhm.
And I can't talk about this enough right now. I can't put enough content out. Terry Fletcher and I have been talking about this a lot, how we have a lot of concern right now for physicians, because essentially what's happening is, with the change to the way that CMS is going to reimburse and pay these substitutes now, it's going to make it where a physician could still purchase a very expensive product from a distributor, and then CMS drastically cut reimbursement to they cut like 90% basically,
Mhm.
which we'll talk about.
Yeah.
But it's something where, back to what I was saying about Terry and I talking about this, we have a lot of concern that our physicians are still going to remain confused. They're going to think that the distributors are the main ones they should be looking to for advice and figuring out how to do, billing, coding, get your reimbursement. And that's not something they do, guys.
No.
On a very large level, that is not something that a distributor is going to do for you. I will say there are times where there are some who care deeply about the compliance side, and they do look at that and they'll help their clients. But this is largely, you buy from me, I wash my hands of it, I'll tell you things verbally, you're on your own type of situation. And this is why it's so urgent. It's so important that, regardless of what you do in this industry, if you are aware of compliance, you work in coding and billing, help me get this word out.
Mhm.
Stick around, like I said. You need to hear this, but help get the word out. Share the content we're putting out there. Terry, this week as well, she had an episode. Same thing. She's talking about skin substitutes. I know my good friend Sean Weiss is going to be talking about this as well, because we're all experiencing the weight of what's happening to physicians. So I want to say that so you stick around. Number two, a disclaimer here. I want to make this very clear that I am speaking from my experience with my clients and what I am personally seeing in the industry. So, we're going to have a real talk today about what to watch for when you're working with a distributor. But I want to say that not every distributor is necessarily going to mislead someone. Not everybody is pressuring people to do things that they shouldn't be doing, or things that the distributor thinks is covering their behind. And what I mean by that, for example, I had a physician reach out a month or two ago, and a distributor was pressuring them to put additional documentation in their clinical record stating why they chose their product over someone else's when they're the same product. They both have a large expense to them. And there was no reason. The physician said, I'm not comfortable with this. There's no reason for me to clinically put this in there. And I just said, then don't do it. And when you talk through the process, some of these people are so intertwined in these practices that they're doing what we would think of as a prior authorization type process. And it's giving a false sense of security. The physicians are still not understanding what this means for them down the road. So that's why today we have to talk about coverage and how these LCD policies and the current withdrawal of one that was going to be implemented is very different from payment and reimbursement. These are not the same things. We've got to be on top of this, and we have to make sure that people that are being vague, that don't, want to tell the whole truth, that don't want to give the whole picture, that they're not going to be the louder voice at the time in the industry. We've got to get this information out there. Now, Michelle, before I jump into laying some groundwork here, do you have any input on that particular part there, just watching from a risk perspective?
I think it's just a good reminder that today is solely focused on the skin substitute topic. But if there are any devices, new services, or things that you have people coming into your practice saying, this is going to be a big money maker for you, we have this product that can help you in this way. Any type of sales pitch, do your own research. If you currently are using products, do your own research. Make sure you're keeping up on that, whether it is a hot topic or not. You should have processes in place where you are continually following what's going on in the compliance realm for the products that you're offering and the services that you're performing. I know that somebody reached out to me a while ago about a procedure that got denied, and come to find out a couple years before, the description was changed, and nobody had done the research to see, or checked up on things to make sure that it was still compliant. So just if you don't do skin substitutes, particular, like, this is not an area that I have a lot of knowledge in. But it is a reminder to be checking across the board.
Yes. Yep. And
Trust
like
and
you
trust
said,
but verify.
yes, exactly. That's a really good way to put it. You can
Yeah.
trust, but you need to verify. Like I said, there's going to be a lot of real talk here. But, one of the things too, Michelle, that has me so frustrated right now, and I said I don't want to use a negative tone in this episode, but we've got to be real. We have to be realistic. And if you go out and look at some of the content I'm putting out there on LinkedIn, just, the other day, there was someone who appears to work in the sales side of this industry who's saying, isn't this the millionth time that this has been posted? And the answer is yes, because there's got to be thousands of physicians who didn't see the other one. So this is not something we're going to be quiet about. And I think that, it's one of those things where we're going to see different behavior from these distributors and these salespeople, where some of them are going to be honest. Some of them are going to say, this is what's going on. I've had some reach out to me and ask questions about coverage, and they have concern for their clients and what they could be going through, or we have all of these UPICs that are happening right now. I'm not going to get into the UPIC subject today, but if you want to learn more about that or hear my thoughts on it, Ron Chapman and I did an episode previously about that. So look back in the episodes, you'll see more information on that. Now, when we think about this, I also am getting feedback that's saying, well, we don't want to scare physicians from using newer technology or newer things in the industry. And the reality is that this isn't a scare tactic. And me
No.
being real today and me laying this out on the line today, I'm not doing this to scare anybody. I'm doing this because I am very passionate about making sure that everybody has the privilege of making an informed decision. That should not be something that you should have to seek out, but like we just said, that's what happened and you have to do this for yourself. So I'm not fear mongering here or anything. And that's why I brought up before my experience in the industry. I cannot even describe to you how many physicians, how many practices I'm currently working with, I've already worked with in 2025 to defend these skin substitutes, and it's still happening. And these physicians are the one who are sitting there sick at night, losing sleep. For me to sit there, I just feel gutted every time I meet with a new physician and we talk about it, and they're almost in shock sometimes that they're in this
Yeah.
situation, number one. Number two, it's happening to small practices as well. This is not just large hospitals. And, some people are like, well, physicians are making a lot of money on this too. Yeah, there are those physicians out there, but there are some clients I have that is a one physician practice. And because some of these claims can be over $100,000 for one claim that is billed for one application, they're being targeted, and that's going to cripple them. And, I feel for these people, because when you start to talk to them about what they were told during the sales process and all of that, they didn't get to make an informed decision. They didn't get to pause and say, okay, yes, this is an awesome product. And I will acknowledge as well that when we're talking about these substitutes, we're largely talking about the ones that are amniotic based. So stem cell based, the biologics. It is doing wonders in the medical industry for people. There are doctors that I've talked to that had patients who were hospitalized 6 times for wounds that have been there for years. And within 2 different courses of application of these skin substitutes, they were healed. There's people that are not having to go through amputations because this is working. So this is very complex. This is very complicated. We have a whole piece of it that is clinically related, but we have a whole piece of it that's compliance related. And if I only had the opportunity to sit with my clients before they made decisions, I would think that their outcome or their fears and everything they're working through would look a little different, because they would have been making an informed decision. And that's not where we're at right now.
Don't you think, though, even from a clinical perspective, when it comes to new technology and as things evolve, it would make sense to me that a provider would approach something new with a certain level of skepticism until they had done the research for themselves. Like, so what, there's no difference. And um I feel like from the clinical side, it's not the same thing. I'm not saying that, but don't you think it would kind of be the same process applied? Like,
I know
let
what
the
you mean.
provider
Like,
from a
they'll look at
clinical
the case
perspective
studies.
look at it and see, okay, this is great. And then see, it's that team effort that we keep talking about. You need everybody from every part present for these conversations. And I hate that people like automatically always go to the providers as the bad guys, because how many of these stories, Stephanie, that when you talk to these providers, they talk about, like you just said, how this is what's actually helping their patient and how their patient has been suffering hospitalization after hospitalization. I can only imagine what pain that patient must be in. So
Mhm.
it's, I really think that when it comes to something like wound care, it's usually um, going to be from a place of compassion, and they're trying to help them. And we often forget about the distributor who came in there trying to sell their product and maybe didn't give the full scope of the details, or
Yeah.
maybe didn't even have the full scope of the details themselves. They're just there to sell something. And so
Hmm.
if we just apply some common sense, um, you know, how we make purchases in our personal life,
Right.
those are the things you should, just because it's not your money buying it. Well, sometimes it is. And that's why these providers are stick over it. Um, but,
Hmm.
apply those same principles.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been really hard. It's been really hard to have to listen to these different stories,
Hmm.
to know the different dynamics, to know the pressure, to know the weight of everything happening. And that's why I do have so much frustration right now for the physicians, because
Hmm.
yes, we talk about all the time, you can't have your head in the sand. That's not going to be an excuse when you are in a situation of an audit or an investigation, all of that. But this is the reality. This is why we talk about it, because it's real and it's happening. It's been happening for over a year now. It's not going away. These cases are now having to be escalated, typically to the ALJ at the federal level. And it's not pretty. And guess who isn't there? The distributors.
Yep,
So
exactly.
this episode is largely today for the physicians, and I hope that the distributors that may listen to this will fully understand why it is such a big deal, what they are doing, meaning how they're interacting with the physicians and their clients. It's not just a client, you're not just selling a product, there's patients involved, there's physicians' livelihoods that are involved here. And it's a big deal, and I take that very seriously.
Hmm.
Now, let's talk a little bit. So, we had, this notification that the LCD policy is not being implemented. So, what does that mean? And Michelle, I know before we started this, you and I were talking, and I explained to you that yes, some LCDs were not implemented, but it's only for those states that were looking to start that January 1st of 2026. So when we hear about skin substitutes being for diabetic foot ulcers, for venous leg ulcers, things like that, that didn't apply across the whole US. Those particular LCD policies are only specific in certain regions with certain contractors. So what was happening in 2025 is that we would go into the CMS MCD coverage, where you can look for different
Hmm.
LCD and NCD policies, and we would see something that would say future effective. And it would be a drafted LCD, sometimes just an LCD article, which is different, but it would have the information and it would say future effective date January 1st, 2026. So that went away. My thought on that is I think that is a moot point right now. And the reason that I say that is at the federal level. So now remember, when we talk about LCD, NCD, we're going to put that in the bucket of coverage, meaning what has to be present in this scenario with this patient, what has to be present in documentation to fit into that bucket of coverage or medical necessity, meaning that that patient is eligible to receive this and the provider is eligible to receive reimbursement. Now, when we go beyond that, we have to look at that actual payment, that
Hmm.
reimbursement. That is completely separate from a coverage policy. So when we look at CMS and the final rule, and you and I have talked about this in 2025, the fact that CMS is drastically reducing reimbursement of skin substitutes and how they categorize them,
Hmm.
completely separate. Think of that as federal or nationwide. So our payment policy, drastic reduction is happening across the US. So yes, LCDs exist, but that's not our main concern right now. Our main concern is now looking at the payments. And the reason I say that is because the physicians or the hospitals or whoever are the ones who are purchasing at a very high rate from a distributor. They're going to have the product, they're going to apply the product, and now we've got a drastic cut in that reimbursement. Yes, the patient fits coverage. We can say, yes, there is medical necessity. We see it in your documentation. Everything looks good. But what does it matter if we go from an average reimbursement of 1,000 per square centimeter to around 127 per square centimeter? What does that matter if the physician's paying over 1,000 or, up close to 1,000, not over? So that is why the payment side of things is such a big deal. Now, we got to break it down one more, because a whole other part of this, in that reduction of payment, CMS now says we are going to categorize this differently. So if you heard the buzz about how they're looking at this as an incident to supply, I like to just think of this as something as like a dressing or something like that in a practice. But in reality, it is a little different, because those types of things would be inclusive to the reimbursement of whatever the patient's there for, right?
Yeah.
So this is something that's going to have separate reimbursement, but they're putting it in this other bucket that really devalues the product that is being used to treat that patient. And the reason I say it devalues it is because we have that drastic drop in the way it's going to be paid. So I have some notes here because it can get confusing, but essentially what you need to be aware of, the key phrases we're looking for now is in that classification is whether or not it is classified by the FDA as 351 or 361 when they approve that product. So what CMS is saying basically is they are going to reimburse things that are essentially the 361. Now, just to give you some ideas there, when we look at 351 versus 361, the difference is really the risk to the patient, or when we think about the FDA process, there's times where there's a lot of different trials someone has to go to prior to putting it on the market and doing pre-market notifications, then post-market research that's done as well. It's a much more vigorous process. So when they say that they'll pay one type over the other, they're saying they'll pay the one that they think is a lower risk to the patient. So it doesn't have all of that wrapped up in it where you've got to go through all of these particular processes to prove that it is safe for the patient through clinical trials and research and all of that. And I know this is a lot of information, but I think it's important because I don't know right now where people can go to hear it in this way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've been doing my best to research this, and I feel like it's just the same information that comes up over and over and over again. So it's certainly informative, but I do feel like my brain is spinning a little.
Yes. Yeah, I know. It gets very confusing. So the way that this is going to apply now, so prior to 2026, when a substitute would be reimbursed, it was under what they would call the average sales price. So essentially there would be a percentage. It could be a low, like a percent. I think it's like 6% maybe. So a 6% rate would be paid out of that average sale price to the provider for that substitute that they're using. Now in 2026 going forward with this implementation of Incident 2, they're paying it at that flat rate. So they're not saying we're going to pay you a percentage of that average sales price. We're paying you a flat rate of 127 and change per square centimeter. So do you already see here where a physician purchasing something at hundreds of dollars per square centimeter, first of all, we aren't going to have the FDA approval for that classification that they would even pay for. And if we do, it's 127 and change per square centimeter.
That's crazy.
The math is not mathing, and I don't like math, and I don't do a lot of math. but it's not
No,
making sense.
it's not. And you know what, obviously this is an expensive product, so that's not like providers are out there with stock rooms full of these skin substitutes. But I do think about those providers who probably have purchased a certain amount of it, and
Yep, because I've had a
or
lot of
have already
conversations.
clearly submitted claims for it. And like,
It's
this would
mind
be,
blowing, isn't it?
it is the financial impact that this has, which granted, so my mind thinks about, I was reading the OIG report, and it said that over the past 2 years payments had increased over 600%. I don't remember the exact percentage that they had
Oh,
there.
yes.
So what do you think drives that increase? Is it the number of providers using the product, or is it the cost that, like, okay, so is it, is it, has the cost just been consistently rising over the two? I mean, that seems like a really significant rise in cost over 2 years, to be honest. Like,
Well, it's a
what
good
causes
question.
that?
It's a good question, but that's also why I question the fact that we don't seem to have certain, like when we talk about that average sales price, right?
Hmm.
I don't know enough about that side of the industry to know if there's even any restrictions. And from my perspective, because we didn't have a reimbursement restriction or limitation, it left it wide open for the distributors to rule the market.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was wondering is, what's caused this increase? Was it like, oh, here's an opportunity? But that obviously sticks out like a sore thumb. So, is this a way that's going to try, to rein that back in
Well,
to
that's
be
why
more,
CMS did it. That's
yeah.
why they did it
Well,
because
clearly, yeah.
yes,
We're
when they see
talking
all those
billions of
dollars,
dollars.
yes, exactly. And that's the problem. That is why they made this decision because when you just look at utilization and you look at the dollars on paper, it's absolutely insane the amount of money that has gone out. Now, I want to make it clear, a lot of people like to villainize our physicians. That's
Yeah.
not what we're talking about here.
No,
Now, I
no.
will say there are some physicians that saw it as a money pot and jumped on that bandwagon, but every single person I am working with and have worked with and have talked to other attorneys about and other consultants about doing the expert work, we don't have a large amount of bad actors. It's not like
No.
they're out here committing fraud. That's not what we're talking about. They're out here doing good clinical work, treating patients, and like I
Having
explained,
good
it's
outcomes,
working. Very good
excellent
outcomes.
outcomes.
Yes. Yes. So it truly is a money issue when you look at what went out the door for reimbursement.
Yeah, it's just crazy. Like, you know, it's one of those things where it's something good, but it's being ruined because of the financial aspect
Yep.
of it.
Now, and here, let me just read this too. I looked up the newsroom notification from CMS about the final rule. They say we estimate this action will reduce gross fee for service program spending for skin substitute services by $19.6 billion in 2026. So that is crazy. That is a very large amount. But it's like we see, there's other times too where we see, say, for example, a new FDA approved drug or a new FDA approved device.
Yeah.
Then we go through that process of getting, okay, do we have a CPT code? Great, we got one. Oh, are the payers reimbursing it? Yes, they are. We see a huge influx, right?
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
it's the same type of thing where it just grew, got out of control, a lot of money coming out of this, and there was no limitation like we were talking about, other than the fact that they would just pay, I'm going to say that average sales price of that 6%
Hmm.
typically. So It's a lot.
It
Now,
is.
one of the other things I want to bring up that physicians really need to be aware of is if you are going to continue using a product in 2026, you need to do your own research or get an expert like myself that understands what we're talking about with the differences in FDA classification, because you've got to look that up and see where that is housed, right? You've got
Mhm.
to know if it's the 351, if it's the 361. If it's the 351, it doesn't even qualify right now for reimbursement. Again, even at a drastically reduced price. And it's my understanding. Now, first of all, let me say here, there's not one place we can go unless someone has done the manual work of putting this together. There's not one place we can go and say, show me all the skin substitutes that are 361 or that are 351. That doesn't exist right now. I'm sure Chat GPT could pull something out, but we know you got to verify. That's not something you
Yeah,
can just trust it
that's
at
not
face value.
sourced.
Yeah, that's not a good idea. Um, but in my own research, I am finding that largely, if not at all, there are not skin substitutes that are biologic based that have that 361 designation, because just based on what it is. You know,
Mhm.
if you think about it, it's a biologic. We're talking stem cells, we're talking amniotic based products here. There's a lot that goes into that. It's not like it's just, okay, yep, we're going to
Mhm.
push that through. We don't have to worry much about trials and how all of that looked. It's just not going to happen that way. So CMS was very specific in the way that they did these two things, dropping the price and then saying it's based on that designation. Now, yeah, it's very possible that a lot of things are going to happen this year with people trying to step in and maybe sue the government, stop things from happening, all of that mess that can happen on the legal side. But at the end of the day, this is the reality of the situation and why we have to make sure that everyone is aware of it. And, you know, when we go back to what I was saying about, not scaring physicians away from things, this is something where it still bothers me when a distributor says we want to help a physician, we want to educate a physician, but we don't want them to just stop using the product.
Yeah.
But I guess I don't understand how it could
How do
continue.
you how do you not stop
We
using the product without being very generous?
I know, I know. And it's the brick wall right now. And
Oh,
that is why as well, when I was saying that some of these salespeople are starting to interact on my LinkedIn posts, uh, I encourage it. Let's have a
yeah,
conversation. Let's talk about it.
yeah.
One of the worst things that happens in this industry is a distributor or a salesperson who thinks that their business model is to sell something and walk away from that physician. If that's your business model, then I question your ethics. And there's a
Mhm.
lot of people out there like that. They don't care enough. But I've also worked with, and I have to say in 2025, I actually worked with some consulting firms that help people bring new products into this industry. And I absolutely loved those projects because I got insight into some of those steps that I don't see every day. And as a part of them bringing it to the market, I got to work with them while they were still working with the FDA. So it's very early on in the process. And they care enough to stop and say, hey, let me spend some money on getting an expert in this. I don't understand how this works. I don't understand what this would mean for a physician. And you know what? At the end of the day, you could help your sales process with that, but not being fake about it, not hiring someone who claims to be an expert to tell someone what you think they want to hear or give them a false sense of security. You could truly know, hey, this is an unlisted code, but this is what it would look like. We have FDA approval, or we're close to FDA approval. This is the category it falls into, reimbursement. These are the different payers that have a policy that say this is experimental, this is investigational, move forward, but this is the reality of what that will look like for you. And you know what? There's people still moving forward, but it's not going to happen on a large scale at a national level like we're seeing now. So, Michelle, do you have any thoughts right now? I just feel like I'm flooding, and I know I'm on my soapbox today, but as you can see, as I'm breaking this down, there's just so much concern right now.
Yeah, and it's a difficult thing because it's almost going to stop the benefit to the patient of that product because you can't realistically purchase it at a certain price from a distributor and take a 90% payment cut on that. That is not realistic for a business model, and it still is. There is still a business side to medicine because there has to be in order to keep your doors open and operate. There's expenses. I mean, that's the reality, and that's why we have compliance. It's just like there's so much going on in my mind right now, and the only thing is like, like, this sucks. I'm just gonna say it. It really does suck, and I say it sucks from the perspective of the outcomes patients are seeing from it.
Yeah.
Because having a family member who has gone through the wound care process and how long it can take these wounds to heal, especially in a diabetic patient. This was the context with which those wounds were, they probably would have really benefited, and maybe it wouldn't have taken 6 months and every 3-day full length leg cast changes in order to like offload and all of this. There's so many ways that wounds have impacted my life, not personally, but a loved one. And I just think about how like this could have been so impactful in the past situations that we've dealt with, and like potential situations going forward. And it's just kind of like, so I feel for the patient. I feel for the provider that wants to genuinely have those excellent outcomes for their patients, because these wounds spiral. It's not just it's something that, unless you have seen wound care, been in there actively, I don't think you can comprehend that side of it. But it's just a really, my mind goes 1,000 different places, but it really is sad for the providers that want those outcomes for their patients. And now, I assume at a certain point there's going to be a balance to this.
Oh yeah, I don't think this is the end.
This is just like the big, whoa, this has to change. Like, hello, newsflash.
It's forcing it.
Look at this. We're going to do something about it, whether you want to or not. So, it will even out somewhere in the future, but it's just, I don't know, kind of sucks in the beginning.
Yeah. And I want to say too, it's not like I love this change. I don't think this is a good change. I don't think what CMS finalized in their reimbursement is fair. I don't think, this is what's best for patients. They said, let me read, this is kind of funny. So they said that they're going to incentivize the use of products with the most clinical evidence of success. So again, that goes back to what we were talking about with the FDA and the fact that when we have certain designation, they're saying we don't have enough of that clinical evidence yet. So they're saying, if you remember, and Michelle, I think that you've seen this in some of your past work, because we've talked about how the collagen-based supplies and dressings, or whatever you want to call them, grafts, how
Yep.
those were, when that first came out, that was a huge deal. That was
Oh, huge.
big and that was expensive. And
Yep.
now basically we're saying, oh, those could be covered, but this isn't going to be covered. But
Yeah.
back then, that was a new thing. It was helping patients. I know in some of the practices I worked in, the patients were choosing to do some out of pocket if that's what it was. But we went through a similar thing where, the hospital I was working with at the time, they realized like, oh wait, our claims aren't getting paid. Oh
Yeah.
crap, we paid thousands for that substitute. Like, what are we going to do?
Why
So,
is everybody suddenly getting this collagen
yes,
dressing? Like,
yes, yeah. So, like I said, I don't think this is the end. We don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what's going to happen, but this is why it's so important to get it out there. I
mhm.
will keep putting content out. I'm going to keep trying to get these people trying to troll the posts to engage in a productive conversation. I would love to have conversations with distributors.
Mhm.
There's definitely going to be a lot that aren't going to even be interested, but we already know what sales tactics can do to our practices. And
Mhm.
me working in the defense side of the industry for so long, I've seen it. And I don't know how else to try and make an impact. I don't even feel like myself individually I can make a large impact, but all we can do is try. All we can do is put the information out there. And, hopefully one person will actually listen, or those distributors out there who really do care about their clients, and it's not buy this from me, see you later, I'll give you as little information as possible, or I'll tell you this but I'm not going to put it in writing. Those types of things, that it's just the reality of what we deal with, and it's always been there. It's just
Mhm.
having a much larger impact currently on physician practices and what their future looks like.
Yeah, yeah. It's not a new problem. It's always been a problem, and you see it across many different types of service types
Hmm.
where they've had uh, salesperson come in, say, look at all these great things. They're always going to tell you all the great things. They want to sell you something. Of course, it's going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. You know what I mean? It's like
Hmm.
the newest, the best, the most innovative. Those people have rehearsed that speech and have probably given that speech hundreds of times because that's their
Yeah,
job. That's their livelihood. And
right.
um, I don't know, that's why you always have to verify. You know,
Hmm.
yes, it's they're not lying that it's a great product and can do amazing things and have amazing outcomes. But the reality of it is sometimes there is that clash between clinical and the payment.
Hmm.
And
Yep. And
it's
this is
everywhere.
why when we talk about the word medical necessity, this can mean so many things.
Mhm.
Right now, all of these physicians I'm working with, they have medical necessity. Their
Yeah.
documentation shows. And just to give you an idea of what a lot of the UPICs are looking for, they're wanting to know, okay, how long have the wounds been there? Has it been over a month? Does the patient have underlying conditions that are going to impact the healing of this particular wound, or make this worse, or more expensive, probably, things like that. Making sure that the wounds themselves are properly documented. Do we and there's pictures. It's not something like we're dealing with a scenario where someone wants to go out and genetically test everybody and bill for it. That's a whole other issue. Like, these patients have a problem.
Yeah.
They need help. They need care. They're costing the health system, especially when you think about that patient that has 6 hospitalizations
Yeah.
prior to these skin substitutes working for them. That is a huge drain on the system.
It
But
is.
this is how the industry works, and we know that.
Mhm.
And when we've talked in the past more broadly and generically about what you need to do when you want to bring something new into a practice, this is why it's so important when we talk about that layer of checking what was done at the FDA level. This is kind of rare that we have something so specific that even blatantly says it has to be this designation for reimbursement. We don't always get that fed to us in that language indirectly. But, this is why when we do see policies that say things are experimental and investigational, they don't pay them because they don't look at it from, that perspective of being fully clinically researched and going through that proper process with the FDA, all of that. Sometimes even with FDA approval, they still look at it as investigational and experimental. So, there's not one rule book. I had a distributor reach out to me and say, hey, I do have some clients that are going through UPIC audits. Can you give me a resource that helps them with that? And the answer is no, because there's a lot of variables, and, obviously it depends on documentation as well. But, I just want to make it clear again, if we go back to the point in the beginning about coverage versus payment, it's not that we don't have medical necessity. We have clinical medical necessity, and I'm seeing it in documentation. Even when UPICs are trying to deny and claw back money, it's there. We have medical necessity. Payment and reimbursement is the problem. And the FDA thing. Just one other little thing. Just one other small thing. Yes. So, Michelle, do you have any final thoughts on that at all?
No, not really any different than what I said before, other than please, please, please understand the significant financial impact this can have to your practice or organization. And that's why it's so important that you're paying attention. Don't for 1 minute think that just because the LCD did not go through that it's now, open season, because the payment reduction is still there. Is there really any talk about changing that? I have not come across anything. So pay attention. The LCD is not the end all be all.
Yes, and we don't have the FDA classification that's required for that reduced payment, with most of the products being used that are amniotic based, which is what this is all surrounding. So,
so if you're, if somebody watching this is in a practice, probably most likely a wound care practice, and they see these types of things are being used, what steps should they take? Do you have a quick recommendation?
I mean, for one, you need to halt and stop purchasing. One of the things that, I say that, but you need to stop purchasing if you realize that that's not going to be reimbursed, or you need to have conversations with these salespeople, because when you show them that that's only going to be at that reduced rate, or it doesn't fit the FDA classification to even have $127 and change per square centimeter, where do you go from there? I don't think you can go anywhere from there. So if this is happening in your practice, you need to talk about it immediately, because, even with the clients I'm currently working with, we had conversations in 2025 about what it looks like with what they've already purchased. There were some physicians who, yes, were scared. They'd already purchased it and they didn't want to move forward with applying it. But we had talks. Yes, you have medical necessity. You have what is required per CMS. We can see that patient qualifies from a coverage perspective, but that's back in 2025.
Yeah.
2026, it looks totally different because the money's not going to be there. So pause, question, go back to the sales rep, talk about it. I have no idea what they're going to be doing, but one of the things that really honestly concerned me, and why I suddenly started to like have this moment of, oh crap, we got to get this information out here as much as we possibly can. And what, like I said, Terry Fletcher and I have been talking about this a lot. One of the things that scared me is that I saw some distributors or people in that side of the industry posting and rejoicing that the LCD did not get implemented. And they were just focusing on the LCD, which is not the problem here.
Oh, that would be a bad day.
Yeah.
A bad day. And also, one thing I will add is make sure when you're looking at things like LCD, you're looking at it for your state.
Mm-hmm.
I know there could be, variances by state, but it's important that you understand what your state has out there specifically.
And you may have people that will tell you, oh, an LCD doesn't matter. I have had attorneys that will tell a person preventatively an LCD doesn't matter. But let me explain that very quickly. The reason they say that is because if we get through, for example, with these UPICs, these physicians are having to typically go through 2 levels of review. They have appeal rights. They can go through, requests for reconsiderations, things like that. I've not seen many be successful at the UPIC level, which means they then have to go to the federal level, which is when I talk about an ALJ hearing or the administrative law judge hearing. So that is where the case then goes before an individual federal judge. At that level, legally, it would not be me as a compliance expert making this argument. A legal argument from a health law attorney is that the LCD does not hold that weight. It's not a law, all of these different things that they can argue from that standpoint. But all of that cost, all of that work getting to the point, that is expensive. That is a lot of hours of consulting rate. That is a lot of money put down with that attorney. Mm-hmm. And yes, okay, sure, they're right. It's not that they're wrong, but what does it mean for you? And what is the level of risk you want to take? You've got to mitigate that for yourself, especially if you are a smaller practice. So I'm sure we're going to get some lashback in some way or another. I'm just kind of expecting to be flooded with things this week on LinkedIn, but I'm ready for it because I'm not talking just to talk. I'm talking from experience. I'm talking from a place where I care about my clients. I care about my physicians that I work with. I care about the distributors who want to do it the right way, who want to have 100% transparency. I'm here for it. If you want to cover some of that and you want to be shady and you just want to give bare minimum information, I'm not here for that. I'm going to work with my physicians and make sure that they're informed and that they're going to know fully that risk that they're taking on. So, at the end of the day, due diligence on every side of things. The distributors can do their own due diligence. Again, that's what I'm hired for at times by those organizations. Everybody needs to do their own. You need to have your own people on your side, and you need to be informed when you make these decisions. All right, so we will go ahead and end it there, Michelle. We will see people back next week. So next week, we're going to get back into some topics about auditing itself. We've seen, and I know you have a lot, where physicians and practitioners are just trying to put their keywords into documentation, right?
Buzzwords, I like to call them, ring-a-ding-dings, or so they think.
Do you have a bell on your desk that you hit when you see the buzzword?
I need one. Ding.
Yes. So we will have more of those antics back in the next episode. But, like I said, today is a serious topic. We needed to pause. We got to get this information out here. This is a much longer episode than we usually do, but I hope people truly understand now why this is the deal that it is and why it's impacting so many people in the industry. All right. Have a good week, and we'll see everybody back next week.